said I was tainted and ruined his life after he destroyed mine. This is the most manipulative breakup you'll ever hear. I, 32F, was with my high school sweetheart, 32M, for 14 years. He broke up with me the day before my birthday and 3 days before the anniversary of my mom's death. He felt like our life together had become very stagnant, and he wanted more out of life. Also, he was having a flirtation with a married older woman at work. After the initial breakup, we kind of talked about it possibly being more like a break, and in 6 months we could possibly see about getting back together. He said he realized how terrible of a boyfriend he had been, and he wanted the time away to become someone who I deserve. This was the end of June. I gave him until July to find a place and move out. Since we shared everything at this point, 14 years is a long time, we needed to really detach everything, so we spent most of July working out how the split would go. Well, that all ended on a very drunken night where he got violent. I didn't press charges because I know he was blackout drunk, but did file a police report, stayed with family while he moved out, and told him we'd have to split up everything via TXT email. He says that he doesn't remember being violent, and that it wasn't actually him who did everything to me, and that he should still be able to prove he is the best man he can be for me. He said that it is a special thing that he is the only person I've had sexual relationships with, and that I should wait to be with anyone else for that 6 months, like our original discussion. He told me that if I were to be with other people, I'd be tainted, and he could never get back together with me. I immediately slept with someone else. I feel like he's very manipulative, and thought maybe he could get me back. He says I ruined everything. He was going to stay the love of my life, was even going to do everything right the next time around, and was even going to ask me to marry him. I don't think he deserves any more of my time, but did I go about it the wrong way with hooking up with someone else? Update 1. All right, so here's where things stand now. After he moved out and I had that whole sleeping with someone else situation, I thought things would calm down. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The guy I hooked up with wasn't some random stranger, by the way. It was actually a coworker. Let me explain before you jump to conclusions. We've been friends for a while, nothing serious, and he knew about my breakup. He was kind, supportive, and honestly, I just wanted to feel like someone saw me as more than just an extension of my ex. It wasn't some grand romance or anything. It just happened. I thought it would stay private. My ex and I weren't together anymore, so it wasn't like I was sneaking around or cheating, right? Well, somehow he found out. He texted me, acting all betrayed and dramatic, saying stuff like, "I knew you'd ruin this, and how could you do this to us?" To us? There is no us anymore, buddy. He said he heard from mutual friends, which honestly means one of the nosy people we both know must have run their mouth. It's like people live for drama and can't wait to stir the pot. He told me he thought we were supposed to stay loyal during the break and accused me of sabotaging his chance to prove he'd changed. I snapped and reminded him that he was the one who broke up with me, not the other way around. He got quiet for a bit, then went back to blaming me. He said I was acting reckless and immature because I couldn't wait for 6 months like we originally talked about. At this point, I was done letting him guilt trip me, so I asked him if his flirtation with the married coworker was still a thing. He got defensive and said it was never serious, just some harmless fun, and that she was going through a tough time, so he was just being supportive. I told him he didn't get to lecture me about loyalty when he had been emotionally cheating on me before we even broke up. He got mad and told me I was blowing things out of proportion, like always. Typical. Then, he brought up the fact that he was the only person I'd ever been with again, like it was some trophy he could hold over my head. He told me I was giving myself away to someone who didn't deserve me and that I'd regret it. He even called my coworker a placeholder and said he knew I'd come crawling back to him eventually. I don't know why he thinks he's so special. Honestly, the more he talks, the more I realize I made the right decision. But the weird part? He started acting really nice again right after this argument. He texted me the next day apologizing for being harsh and said he wanted to talk things out like adults. I didn't reply right away because, frankly, I didn't trust him. I told myself I'd only meet up if he promised to keep things civil. He agreed, so we met up at a coffee shop. The first thing he did was try to hug me, which I dodged. He started talking about how he was in therapy now and wanted to work on himself, how he realized he had been selfish, and how he still loved me. He even brought a scrapbook of our memories together, as if flipping through old photos would magically erase everything he did. I stayed polite but firm, telling him that while I hoped he was serious about bettering himself, it wasn't my responsibility to stick around and wait for him to figure it out. He nodded like he understood, but then he hit me with, "I still think we're soulmates. I'll wait for you no matter how long it takes." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Later that night, I got a message from one of my friends saying my ex had been posting cryptic stuff on social media about how true love requires patience and how he was determined to win back what's his. The comments were full of people hyping him up, saying things like, "You've got this, man," and "If it's meant to be, it'll happen." Meanwhile, I'm over here just trying to live my life and move on. Then things got even weirder. A few days later, I came home to find a box on my doorstep. Inside were some of my old things from when we lived together. Random books, a hoodie I'd forgotten about, and even a bottle of my favorite perfume. There was also a letter where he apologized for how things ended and said he still believed we were meant to be. He ended it by saying he'd leave me alone for now, but hoped I'd eventually see the light. Honestly, I'm torn. Part of me thinks he's just trying to manipulate me again, but another part wonders if he really is trying to change. Either way, I don't think I owe him anything. I didn't ruin anything. He made his choices, and I'm making mine. It just sucks that even after everything, he still manages to get under my skin. I'm not sure what to do next, but one thing's for sure. I'm not going to let him guilt me into feeling like I was the bad guy in all of this. If he wants to play the victim, fine, but that doesn't mean I have to play along. This whole situation has been a roller coaster, and honestly, I'm over it. I deserve better. Update 2. So things didn't stay quiet for long. After the whole box on the doorstep thing, I decided I wasn't going to engage with my ex anymore. No texts, no social media, nothing. I blocked him on everything, figuring that'd be the end of it. But apparently he didn't take the hint. A few days later, I got a message from a mutual friend saying my ex had been asking around about me. He was apparently concerned about who I'd been hanging out with and whether I was okay. It was all framed as if he was just worried about me, but it felt more like he was trying to keep tabs on my life. I asked this mutual friend to stop giving him updates, and she promised she would, but not before dropping the bomb that my ex had been telling people we were working things out. That floored me because I hadn't even spoken to him since the coffee shop meetup. It felt like he was trying to rewrite the narrative, making himself look like the devoted ex who was just waiting for me to come back. Then it escalated. I started getting these anonymous texts from a number I didn't recognize. At first, they were vague, like, "I hope you're doing okay," and "You deserve happiness." But then they got more specific. One said, "I saw you at the grocery store yesterday. You looked beautiful." That freaked me out because I had been at the store the day before, and I hadn't noticed anyone watching me. I immediately suspected it was my ex, but I couldn't prove it. I brought it up to my coworker, the one I hooked up with, and he offered to walk me to my car after work for a while, just in case. It felt a little dramatic, but I appreciated the gesture. Things were fine for a bit, but then my coworker mentioned he'd been getting weird vibes too. He said he'd noticed a car parked near his apartment a few times, one that didn't belong to anyone in his building. He joked that maybe my ex was stalking him, but honestly, I wouldn't put it past him. Then, I found out my ex had been talking to my family. My sister called me one night, super annoyed, saying he had reached out to her to get advice on how to fix things with me. She told him to leave me alone and that I seemed happier without him, but he apparently didn't take that well. He started crying on the phone, saying he'd made a mistake and didn't know how to move on. My sister told me she hung up on him, but it was clear he wasn't ready to let go, and just when I thought he couldn't take it any further, he showed up at my work. I was in the middle of a meeting when the receptionist came in and whispered that someone was asking for me. I figured it was a delivery or something, so I stepped out, and there he was, standing in the lobby with this sad, desperate look on his face. He had a bouquet of flowers and some kind of gift bag. I immediately told him he shouldn't be there, but he started pleading, saying he just needed 5 minutes to explain himself. I told him no. I didn't want to cause a scene at work, so I kept my voice calm and asked him to leave. He refused and said he wasn't leaving until I heard him out. At this point, one of my coworkers stepped in and told him he needed to go, or they'd call security. That finally got him to leave, but not before he shouted, "This isn't over," as he walked out. Later that night, I got an email from him. It was pages long, basically a manifesto about how he was a changed man, how he'd been talking to a therapist, and how he realized he couldn't live without me. He blamed his behavior on the trauma he'd been carrying from his own childhood, saying he never learned how to love properly. He also tried to guilt-trip me, saying he wasn't eating or sleeping and that he felt like his life had no purpose without me. I forwarded the email to a friend, asking if I should be worried, and they suggested I get a restraining order. At first, I thought that was overkill, but after the work incident and the texts, I'm starting to think they might be right. The final straw came a couple of days ago. I was out with some friends, just trying to unwind, when one of them noticed someone taking pictures of us from across the bar. They pointed him out, and yep, it was my ex. He was sitting at a table by himself, pretending to look at his phone, but the camera was definitely pointed at us. I confronted him, and he tried to play dumb, saying he was just there to grab a drink. When I asked him about the pictures, he denied it and walked out. I'm done playing nice. I'm going to talk to the police about the texts, the work incident, and now the stalking. I don't know what his end game is, but this isn't healthy or normal. At this point, I don't even care if he's changed or not. He's crossed too many lines, and I need to prioritize my safety. This whole situation is exhausting, but I'm not going to let him control my life anymore. Update 3. It's been a whirlwind since the last time I updated, but things have finally come to a head. After the bar incident, I followed through and filed a police report. I brought up the anonymous texts, the work visit, and the stalking. The officer I spoke with took it seriously and suggested I get a restraining order. I hesitated at first because, honestly, it felt like such a big step. But then I thought about everything he'd done and realized it wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about sending a clear message that this behavior wasn't okay. I filed for the restraining order the next day. My ex wasn't happy about it. He tried to contact me again through mutual friends, saying he couldn't believe I'd do this to him. One friend even tried to guilt-trip me, saying he was really struggling and just needed someone to talk to. I shut that down fast and told them I wasn't responsible for his mental health, especially not after everything he'd put me through. The restraining order was approved, and he was served a few days later. That's when things took a bizarre turn. Instead of backing off, he posted this long, dramatic rant on social media about how he was being punished for loving too much. He made himself sound like some tragic hero, claiming he only ever wanted to fight for us. The comments were a mix of people supporting him and others calling him out for being obsessive. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from his older brother. We'd never been super close, but he wanted to apologize for his brother's behavior. He told me their family had been trying to get him to back off, but that my ex wasn't listening to anyone. Apparently, the married coworker he had been flirting with had filed her own complaint against him at work because he'd been harassing her too. Hearing that made me realize just how deep this rabbit hole went. A few days later, I got another update, this time from my coworker, the one I'd hooked up with. He told me he'd seen my ex outside his apartment again, but this time he managed to take a picture of the car and the license plate. I passed it along to the police, and they said they'd look into it. At this point, I was feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. It felt like no matter what I did, my ex kept finding new ways to insert himself into my life. The breaking point came when my sister called me in a panic. My ex had shown up at her house unannounced, claiming he just wanted to talk to someone who understood him. My sister's husband told him to leave, but he refused until they threatened to call the cops. That was it for me. I told the police about the incident and pushed for them to take action. Last week, I got a call saying they'd arrested him for violating the restraining order. He'd been caught sitting in his car outside my building, which was a direct violation. Part of me felt relief, but another part felt drained. I never wanted it to come to this. I just wanted to move on and live my life without constantly looking over my shoulder. Since his arrest, things have been quiet. I've been focusing on myself and trying to rebuild my life. I started therapy, which has been a game changer. My therapist helped me unpack a lot of the guilt and manipulation I'd been carrying from my relationship with him. It's crazy how much you can normalize bad behavior when you're in the thick of it. As for my coworker, we've decided to keep things casual for now. He's been incredibly supportive through all of this, but I don't think I'm ready for anything serious yet. I need time to figure out who I am outside of a relationship. 14 years is a long time to be tied to someone, and I'm realizing now how much of myself I lost along the way. I wish I could say this experience hasn't left scars, but that wouldn't be true. What I can say is that I'm learning how to heal. I'm finally putting myself first, and it feels good to reclaim that power. My ex once told me I'd regret moving on without him, but the only regret I have is not standing up for myself sooner. If you're reading this and dealing with someone who's trying to control you, please know that you don't owe them anything. You're not responsible for their feelings or their actions. It's okay to put yourself first, even if it means making tough decisions. Life's too short to waste on people who don't respect your boundaries. I'm done with this chapter of my life, and I'm ready to move forward. No more looking back.